what percentage do you think of Muslims in the West are ideologically captured?
Oh, that's a complicated question. When you ask ideologically captured, that's what makes it complicated.
What I'm interested in here is I come from a Jewish background, but secular, atheist. I don't remember ever hearing the word God in my life, even though we went to synagogue once or twice a year and there were bar mitzvahs, but it was a cultural thing. I didn't, and I've got a friend who seemed to be the same, but Muslim. And we lived in a different country. We were in Argentina. We were both living there. And I came to realize he had several editions of the Quran that he'd brought to Argentina, and that also he wasn't drinking alcohol. And there were quite a few things. And gradually there became too many differences between us, and we sort of drifted. Not because I was Jewish, but I think because I was an atheist. And that got me thinking, how common is it with Muslims in general for them to be religious and potentially, because I'm an atheist speaking here, scary?
Yeah. Really high, Andrew. Yeah, higher than either one of us want to admit. So the truth is that even if you have a buddy that you work with or that you go to school with, who is a great person, kind, generous, fun-loving, that person more likely than not holds very deeply scary anti-Semitic, homophobic, anti-women views. They may not show up right away, but they're there because this person most likely grew up in a environment, socialized in an environment that encouraged these things, not even really encouraged them, but like normalize them to the extent that to not be this is just unheard of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that person may not necessarily want to push those views on others. If we're asking the percentage of the people that would try to push this hate into the public sphere, into policy, into government, into media, into law enforcement, stuff like that, then thankfully it's a lower number. So it's that's what we're dealing with. Most Muslims are just like I was, just raised in normalized anti-Semitism, for example, to the point that you don't even know that that's a bad thing. Because it's just, well, obviously this is the way it is. And so you have to go through this really difficult process of, first of all, acknowledging that you carry this irrational hate in you, forgiving yourself for being indoctrinated into it and carrying it. And then you can start the process of deprogramming and cleansing it out of you. That's a long process that takes many years. And it's not one that you can do when you're surrounded. And I mean surrounded like a school of fish with everybody being anti-Semitic. Now, that's just one example of the hate, but there's lots more.
I suppose the views towards women is another one. Well, there are Jews like that. I've grown up around some Jewish people like that, particularly at the conservative end and the Orthodox end and the Hasidic end. I'm not criticizing. I get attacked for criticizing all Hasidic communities, but there is that. It does exist there. There are Christians like that as well. But it feels like not to the same extent.
You're correct.
Why is that?
Well, I think the main reason is because there is a separation of church and state. So when you talk about Christians, they're not being forced into it, like they're not being indoctrinated into it, like their education, their media, their government, like everything. So when you look at a Muslim majority country, it's everywhere. These ideas are everywhere. So for you to think even that another narrative exists, first and foremost, is you're an anomaly, you know? But that's not the same for Christian majority countries. You're not hearing this. You're not getting these fundamentalist, extremist, evangelical views. You're not getting them in the mainstream. You know, the Westboro Baptist Church isn't, running schools. And it's the same for the Jewish community. Like, yeah, there's going to be small groups, in, I completely forgot the name of the area in Brooklyn.
Monsey.
Well, there's that too, but I was thinking of the one that starts with a J, I think. But anyway, there's small pockets, there's small areas. But, look at Israel, which is the only Jewish majority country. 20% of the inhabitants are Arabs. You know what I mean? Like, there's not a overarching normalizing of hating the other in the way that there is in Muslim societies, Muslim countries, Muslim schools. Now, I was born and raised in Canada, but I went to Islamic schools. I went to the mosque every Friday. So you live in kind of like this little Sharia bubble, little separatist bubble. And you can speak to people from Scotland, from America, from, Sweden, France. They'll tell you the same story. It's the same thing. Even though you're living in a free secular country, you're like in this bubble of Islamic law. So that's all we hear. That's all we see. That's all we know. And, when you're living in a free country, you're getting all sorts of different narratives, all sorts of different ideas. You're being encouraged to think critically. You're reading stories. You're reading more than one book,
Yeah.
So you really, there's no comparison to the way Christians or Jewish people are today compared to the way Muslim people are today. If you're going to look at Christians a few hundred years ago, yes, we can start making comparisons. But the way it is today, there's no comparison. There's no Christian country that's killing people for being gay, that's putting women in prison for not dressing a certain way. You know what I mean? Like all sorts of these Islamic laws that are out there that are persecuting people daily, that are forcing people to conform and forcing people to follow this ideology because what's the alternative? Death. They're going to persecute you and your family. They're not going to just stop at you either. They will continue on with the rest of your family. So the risk is too high. So people just conform.
Sam Harris obviously famously called Islam the motherlode of bad ideas. Is there something inherent to the text that is different than to Jewish texts, Christian texts? Or is it, as you said, well, no, it's society. It's moved a few hundred years later, and this could have happened with any religion.
Well, I think that the inherent difference is Islam really teaches that you need, as a believing Muslim, it is your duty to spread Islam through any means necessary. And we can see that. We can see how Islam started on this little peninsula, and then it just grew, right? It just spread, and it's continuing to spread. And their hope is to spread further. And so that's really the way that's done in such a pervasive way. Now it's pervasive. In the past, it was very upright. It was like a sword, You're going to convert or you're going to die. Those are your options. But now it's more subversive. But it's that same idea of it's this supremacist attitude of if you're not a Muslim, then you are an other, and you are beneath the rest of Muslims. And in order to elevate yourself, you need to become a Muslim. In order to stay alive in some cases, you need to become a Muslim. Now, Christians are missionaries and they spread their word. They do the same thing, except they're not using violence anymore. But, just yesterday, I saw the most horrible video. from Nigeria, where a mob of Muslim men attacked a Christian man, and they had machetes, and they hacked this poor man's head off. I didn't watch that part of the video because he's Christian. So that kind of hate of the other that is so vicious, so violent, unfortunately, you're only seeing that with Islamic extremists. Obviously, October 7th is another prime example of that.
What is Islam? And I compare it to Judaism again. Okay, so you can be, I'm an atheist, but I'm Jewish culturally, and I think ethnically, because my heritage said 95% Ashkenazi Jewish. And the reason I ask as well is because there's this idea that if you criticize Islam, you're being racist. I want people to be able to criticize the Jewish belief without saying things about our noses and money and things like that. Where do you stand on all that? What is Islam?
So there's, you said so many things that I want to respond to there. So yes, first and foremost, that term Islamophobia, that was created by Iran. So that was created with the aim of suppressing criticism of the religion. And so we criticize everything all the time. We criticize Republicans, we criticize communists, we criticize Judaism, we criticize Christianity. That's fine. But as soon as you start to criticize Islam, it's like, oh my gosh, you're being racist, you're xenophobic, you're Islamophobic. Well, that's by design. That's to keep you quiet. That's a bottom-up blasphemy laws, right?
They're using a Western woke, to use a lack of a better term, philosophy. Absolutely.
Which is, again, by design.
Smart.
It's very smart. And it works. You know, in Iran, if you criticize Islam, you are going to be hanging from a crane the next day, right? But they can't do that in the West. So how are we going to stop people from criticizing Islam? We'll find a way to do that, and that's what they found. So, and it works perfectly, unfortunately, because there's a lot of useful idiots out there. And so it doesn't even have to be Muslims themselves that are suppressing criticism of the religion anymore, because we've got all of these dumb kids doing that for them.